Settle into comfort now. Let the weight of the present day ease from your shoulders. Tonight, we journey not across an ocean, but across time to a place that once stood on the very continent beneath you, yet exists now only in silence and earthen monuments, slowly reclaimed by grass. Imagine, if you will, the Mississippi River Valley in the year 1100. The floodplain stretches wide and fertile, the river itself a great artery of movement and life. And here, where the river bends, where the land lies flat and generous, rises something extraordinary. A city, not a village, not a settlement, but a true city, the largest north of Mexico, larger than London of the same era, home to as many as 20,000 souls. This is Cahokia, a name given centuries later, borrowed from a tribe that would arrive long after the city fell silent. The people who built it, who lived within its boundaries, who raised its monuments to the sky, their name for their home is lost to us now, dissolved into time like morning mist over the river. But their city remains. Or rather, its bones remain more than 100 earthen mounds, rising from the floodplain, the largest a terraced pyramid of earth 10 stories tall, covering 14 acres at its base. These monuments were not ruins when they were built. They were the living architecture of ambition, faith, labor, and hierarchy. They were home. Tonight, we will walk through this vanished world. We will inhabit the rhythms of daily life, the cycle of seasons, the weight of baskets, and the ache of muscles. We will witness the city's mysterious rise and its even more mysterious fall. We will stand within circles of cedar posts, aligned to the sun's journey across the sky. And we will glimpse the sophisticated political structures that bound thousands of people together in common purpose. The story of Cahokia is the story of a civilization that flourished and faded, leaving behind questions carved in earth. Let us begin. You wake in darkness, in the hour before dawn. Around you, the thatched walls of your home hold the night's coolness close. The dwelling is small, perhaps 15 feet across, circular, with walls of woven cane plastered with clay and a roof of bundled grass rising to a central smoke hole. The floor beneath you is packed earth, swept clean, covered with woven mats where you sleep. The fire in the central hearth has burned down to embers, glowing faintly in the dimness. Outside, the city stirs. You can hear it even through the walls, the low murmur of voices, the bark of dogs, the cry of an infant somewhere in the neighboring houses. Cahokia wakes early. The rhythm of life here is governed by the sun, by the seasons, by the demands of the earth, and the expectations of the community. You rise, stepping carefully around your family still sleeping. Your hands find the water jar by the door, cool and damp to the touch. You splash water on your face, feeling the shock of it drive away the last wisps of sleep. Through the doorway, the sky is lightening, a pale gray spreading across the eastern horizon, promising another summer day of heat and labor. Stepping outside, you pause for a moment to orient yourself. Your house sits in one of the residential areas that sprawl around the city's ceremonial core. To the north and east, you can see the mounds rising against the dawn sky, some small, barely more than gentle swells in the earth, others towering monuments that dominate the landscape. The largest, which the people call by a name now lost, but which we might call Monk's Mound, looms to the northeast, its terraced sides catching the first rays of sunlight. From its summit, 100 feet above the plain, smoke rises from the houses of the elite who live there, literally above the common people. The streets between the houses are not paved, but they are well worn, packed hard by thousands of feet. They follow patterns that seem almost planned straight lines and right angles connecting different areas of the city. As you walk toward the fields, you pass clusters of houses similar to your own, their walls the color of dried clay, their roofs golden with thatch. Some are larger, suggesting extended families or greater wealth. Others are workshops. You can smell the smoke of kilns where potters fire their vessels. Hear the rhythmic tapping of copper being worked into ornaments. The city is larger than you can fully comprehend. Walking from one end to the other would take the better part of a morning. 10,000 people, perhaps 20,000, no one can count them all. More people than you could know in a lifetime. More faces than you could remember. It is a density of humanity that shapes everything: the noise, the smells, the constant presence of others. Your destination this morning is the fields that lie beyond the residential zones, stretching toward the river. The Mississippi is the city's lifeline. Its annual floods renew the soil, deposit rich silt that makes the valley extraordinarily fertile. Your family, like most commoner families, maintains a plot in the communal fields. It is not large, perhaps half an acre, but it is enough. The walk takes you past the great plaza at the city's heart. Even at this early hour, people are gathering there. The plaza is a carefully leveled expanse of earth, the size of several city blocks, cleared of all structures, maintained as smooth and open ground. It serves many purposes: ceremonies, markets, games, gatherings. Later in the day, young men will play chunky here, rolling stone discs across the plaza and throwing spears to land near where the disc stops. A game of skill and gambling that can draw crowds of spectators. But now, in the gentle light of dawn, the plaza is quiet. A few early risers cross it, heading to their own destinations. In the center, a tall pole rises, carved and painted, though from this distance you cannot make out its details. Around the plaza's edges stand the platform mounds, where important buildings sit, temples, or the houses of chiefs. These structures are visible even from here, their walls of bent saplings and woven mats, their roofs carefully thatched. Smoke rises from some of them. The elite wake early too, though their day's labor is of a different nature than yours. You continue past the plaza, through the wooden palisade wall that encircles the city's core. The wall is an impressive structure: tall posts set deep in the earth, spaced close enough that a person cannot pass between them, topped with a walkway where guards can patrol. When it was first built, the timber was fresh and strong, but now, after decades, some posts are beginning to rot at their bases, and there is talk of rebuilding sections. The wall's purpose is debated in quiet conversations. Some say it is to defend against enemies' rival chiefdoms or rebellious settlements that might attack. Others whisper that it is to keep the people in, to prevent them from leaving, to mark the boundary between the sacred center and the profane outskirts. Beyond the wall, the city continues, but changes. The houses are more scattered, interspersed with gardens and small workshops. Then, gradually, the buildings thin out and the fields begin. The agricultural landscape of Cahokia is one of patient, accumulated knowledge. The people here have been growing crops in this valley for generations, learning its moods, its cycles, its gifts and demands. The primary crops are the Three Sisters corn, beans, and squash planted together in a system that has proven itself across centuries. Your family's plot is waiting. The corn is already waist-high, its broad leaves rustling in the morning breeze. Between the corn stalks, bean plants climb upward, using the corn as living trellises. At the base, squash spreads its large leaves across the ground, shading the soil, holding moisture, discouraging weeds. It is an elegant system. The corn provides structure. The beans fix nitrogen in the soil, enriching it. The squash protects and preserves. You kneel beside the first row, your hands moving with practiced efficiency. Weeds have sprouted in the few days since you last tended the plot. You pull them carefully, shaking the dirt from their roots before tossing them aside. The soil is dark and rich, still slightly damp from yesterday's brief rain. It smells of growth, of organic matter breaking down and building up, the endless cycle that sustains life. The morning passes in this rhythm, moving between rows, pulling weeds, checking each plant for signs of pests or disease. You find a few caterpillars on the corn leaves and remove them, crushing them between your fingers. A squash plant shows yellowing leaves, possibly a sign of root rot. You make a mental note to water it less frequently. Other farmers work nearby in their own plots. You exchange occasional words, comments about the weather, observations about the crops, small jokes to pass the time. The work is not arduous, not today, but it is constant. A plot this size requires attention every few days during the growing season. Neglect it, and the yield suffers. The margin between sufficiency and shortage is not wide. As the sun climbs higher, the heat builds. By mid-morning, you are sweating, your back aching from bending and kneeling. You take breaks to drink from a water gourd you brought, to stand and stretch, to look out across the vast patchwork of fields that feed the city. Thousands of plots like yours, tended by thousands of hands. The collective labor that makes urban life possible. Around midday, you finish the weeding. The plot looks orderly now, the corn standing in neat rows, the ground around each plant clear and dark. You gather your tools, a simple digging stick with a fire-hardened tip, a stone hoe blade lashed to a wooden handle with cordage made from plant fibers, and begin the walk back to the city. Returning through the fields, you notice the work parties in the distance. These are the communal labor groups, organized by the chiefs, who work on projects far larger than any family could accomplish alone. Today, they are working on one of the mounds. You can see the line of workers, each carrying a basket of earth, climbing the mound's slope to deposit their load at the top. It is slow work, incremental work. The mounds are built one basket at a time, one day at a time, over years or even decades. You have participated in this labor yourself many times. It is expected of commoners, a form of tribute to the chiefs, a demonstration of social cohesion, a sacred duty, depending on how one views it. The work is exhausting. A basket of earth, when full, weighs as much as a small child. Carrying it up a slope, even a gentle slope, taxes the legs and back. You make dozens of trips in a day, perhaps hundreds. Your muscles ache for days afterward. But the mounds grow. Monk's Mound, the greatest of them all, required millions of basket loads. Archaeologists in a distant future will calculate that it contains more than 14 million cubic feet of earth, that it took decades to build, that it represents a staggering investment of human labor. But you do not think in these terms. You think of the ache in your shoulders, the dust in your throat, the slow accumulation of dirt rising toward the sky. The mounds serve purposes both practical and sacred. The platform mounds elevate important buildings and important people above the floodplain, above the seasonal inundations, above the common people, closer to the sky and the powers that dwell there. The conical mounds mark burials of significant individuals, their bodies interred with grave goods that speak of status and wealth. Some mounds align with celestial events, their positions carefully calculated by those who watch the stars and track the sun's movement across the horizon. To live in Cahokia is to live always in the shadow of these monuments. They dominate the landscape, define the city's identity, embody the ambitions of its rulers. They are built by commoners, but belong to the elite. They will outlast everyone who touches them, enduring centuries beyond the city's abandonment, puzzling the Europeans who will one day arrive and wonder at these grassy hills in the middle of the prairie, never imagining the civilization that raised them. Entering the city again through the palisade gate, you are struck by the density of activity. Midday is when the city is most alive. The plaza bustles with people. Traders have set up temporary displays of goods marine shell beads from the Gulf of Mexico, hundreds of miles to the south, copper from the Great Lakes to the north, exotic stones, and finished goods from distant regions. The trade networks that feed Cahokia are extensive, reaching across half a continent, bringing luxury goods and raw materials to this central place. You pause to look at the shell beads. They are beautiful, delicate discs cut from the spiral chambers of whelk shells, polished until they glow white in the sunlight, pierced for stringing. A necklace of such beads represents wealth and status. You cannot afford them, but you can admire them. Imagine them against skin, Feel for a moment the desire for beautiful things that transcends time and culture. Nearby, a chunky game is underway. Young men, stripped to breechcloths, their skin gleaming with sweat, focus intently on the rolling stone disc. One player releases it with a smooth, practiced motion, and it rolls across the hard-packed earth of the plaza. Almost immediately, two players sprint after it, long wooden spears raised. At the right moment, they throw, and the spears fly forward, landing with solid thuds on the ground. The goal is to land closest to where the disc eventually stops. The crowd around the game cheers or groans, depending on which player they have wagered on. Chunky is more than entertainment. It is a way for young men to demonstrate skill and courage, to win prestige and goods through gambling, to negotiate status in a highly stratified society. The game can become intensely competitive, with significant wealth-changing hands, sometimes leading to disputes and even violence. You watch for a few moments, then continue toward home. The afternoon stretches ahead. There are tasks waiting repairs to the house's thatching, where rain has begun to seep through, cordage to make from plant fibers, a deer hide to process into leather. The work of maintaining a household in Cahokia is never finished. Your house, when you reach it, is quiet. Your family is scattered to their own tasks, children gathering firewood or helping neighbors. Your spouse perhaps working on pottery or weaving. You settle into the familiar labor of repair, pulling away the damaged thatch, weaving new bundles of grass into the roof's framework. As you work, you think about the coming seasons. It is summer now, the growing season, when the work is constant but not yet urgent. In a few weeks, the beans will be ready to harvest. And the squash. Finally, in late summer and early autumn, the corn, the most important harvest, the one that will determine whether winter brings sufficiency or shortage. After harvest comes processing. Corn must be dried, shelled from the cob, stored in pits lined with bark or mats to keep out moisture and vermin. Some will be ground into meal for making bread. Some will be saved for seed. The calculations are precise, born of experience. Too little saved, and spring planting suffers. Too much consumed, and hunger arrives before the next harvest. Winter in Cahokia is a time of drawing inward. The fields lie dormant. The Mississippi freezes, though not every year. People stay close to their hearths, live on stored food, work on crafts and tools, tell stories, wait for the lengthening days that signal spring's return. But winter also brings ceremonies. The elite use this time to reinforce their power, to organize festivals aligned with solar events, to distribute food to the people in displays of generosity that mask the underlying extraction of labor and tribute. You participate in these ceremonies because everyone does, because they are part of the city's rhythm, because to refuse would mark you as separate, suspect, dangerous. The ceremonies are elaborate. They take place in the plaza or on the platform mounds, with the chiefs and priests dressed in costumes of feathers and copper, their faces painted, their movements ritualized. There is dancing, drumming, chanting. Sometimes there are sacrifices animals, or, in whispered rumors, humans, though you have never witnessed this yourself. The ceremonies blend religion and politics so completely that they cannot be separated. The chiefs claim to mediate between the people and the powers that control weather, fertility, health, warfare. To honor the chiefs is to honor those powers. To serve the chiefs is to serve cosmic order. You believe this, or you accept it, or you tolerate it. The distinction is unclear, even to yourself. The hierarchy of Cahokia is so deeply embedded in daily life that imagining alternatives is difficult. Some people live atop mounds in large, comfortable houses. Others live in small thatched huts and labor in fields and on construction projects. This is simply the way things are, have always been, will always be. But there are tensions. You hear them in quiet conversations, see them in occasional acts of resistance. A family that moves away to a smaller settlement where the chiefs, Demands are lighter. A young man who refuses to participate in a work party and faces consequences. Graffiti carved into a mound's clay surface in the night, defiant and quickly erased. The palisade wall exists for a reason. The guards who patrol it are not merely watching for external enemies. As evening approaches, the city settles into a different rhythm. People return from fields and workshops. Cooking fires are lit. The smell of roasting corn and simmering stews fills the air. Children play in the streets, their laughter and shouts echoing between houses. Dogs scavenge for scraps. The light softens, turns golden, then begins to fade. You eat your evening meal with your family cornbread, beans cooked with squash, a bit of dried fish from the river. The food is simple but adequate. Cahokia's agricultural system, for all its demands, does feed its people most of the time. Famines occur, but not frequently. The three sisters, cultivated with care and knowledge, provide reliable nutrition. After the meal, as darkness settles fully, you step outside again. The city at night is different, quieter, the streets emptying, individual fires glowing from doorways and smoke holes. Above, the stars emerge, brilliant and uncountable in the sky, unpolluted by artificial light. You know some of their patterns, recognize the constellations that mark the seasons, guide travelers, feature in stories and ceremonies. Somewhere in the city, the elite astronomers are watching those same stars, tracking their movements, noting the positions of planets, calculating the dates of future ceremonies. They use this knowledge to maintain power, to demonstrate their connection to cosmic forces, to organize the city's ritual calendar. The timber circles outside the palisade wall great rings of cedar posts aligned. Solstices and equinoxes stand as monuments to this astronomical knowledge, this integration of earth and sky. But you are tired. The day's labor has left you ready for sleep. You return to your house, to the mat on the floor, to the warmth of family bodies in the small space. Outside, Cahokia continues its existence 10,000 souls or 20,000, breathing and dreaming in the darkness, their lives woven together in patterns of labor and hierarchy, belief and survival, ambition and resignation. This is daily life in the largest city north of Mexico, in the year 1100, in the civilization that future centuries will forget and then slowly rediscover. Tomorrow will bring more of the same fields to tend, work parties to join, repairs to make, food to prepare. The rhythm of life in Cahokia is measured and relentless, shaped by seasons and by the demands of those who rule from atop the earthen monuments. And for now, in this moment, that rhythm continues. The city sleeps, the river flows, the mounds stand silent against the stars. The city did not always exist. The land where Cahokia would rise had been inhabited for centuries, but as scattered villages, modest settlements of a few dozen or a few hundred people. They grew crops, fished the river, lived lives bounded by kin and season. Nothing suggested the transformation to come. Around the year 1050, something changed. The change was not gradual. Archaeological evidence reveals an almost explosive growth, a florescence, scholars would later call it. Within a few decades, the population surged, villages coalesced, migrants arrived from across the region, and the earthworks began. The construction phase that followed was extraordinary in its intensity and scale. Around the year 1100, during a period lasting perhaps 3 or 4 generations, most of Cahokia's major mounds were raised. Millions of basket loads of earth, carried by thousands of hands, accumulated into monuments. Monk's Mound grew to its towering height. Platform mounds for elite residences were positioned with careful attention to alignment and symbolism. The great plaza was leveled and maintained. The city's core took the shape it would hold for the next century and a half. What sparked this transformation remains a subject of scholarly debate and imaginative reconstruction. Some researchers propose the arrival of new leadership, perhaps a charismatic chief or a religious movement that captured the imagination and loyalty of the population. Others point to environmental conditions. The period from roughly 1050 to 1200 was characterized by relatively stable climate, fewer floods than the centuries before or after, and favorable growing conditions. The Mississippi River Valley, always fertile, became even more productive. Surpluses accumulated, population grew, and with surplus and population came the possibility of specialization, hierarchy, monumental architecture. The city at its peak was unlike anything else in North America north of Mexico. Its population may have reached 20,000 in the urban core, with tens of thousands more in the surrounding settlements that looked to Cahokia as their political and spiritual center. Trade networks extended in all directions: marine shells from the Gulf Coast, copper from the Great Lakes, exotic stones, and minerals from distant quarries. Craft specialists produced goods of remarkable quality, intricately engraved shell gorgets, copper ornaments hammered and shaped, pottery vessels bearing stylized imagery of the cosmos. The city's influence radiated outward. Smaller centers throughout the Mississippi and Ohio valleys adopted Cahokian architectural styles, burial practices, and religious iconography. Whether this spread represented conquest, colonization, trade partnerships, or religious conversion is uncertain. Likely it was some combination of different relationships with different communities, shifting alliances, tribute extracted from some settlements, and willing participation from others. But even at its height, there were tensions. Around the year 1175, the residents constructed a massive wooden palisade around the city's core. The wall required tens of thousands of posts, each stripped from the surrounding forests, dragged to the site, and set deep into the earth. It enclosed the central mounds, the great plaza, and the elite residences. It separated the sacred and powerful from the profane and common. Why build such a wall? The practical explanation is defense protection from external enemies, from rival chiefdoms or rebellious subordinate settlements. But the wall also functioned as social control, marking boundaries, restricting movement, embodying in timber the hierarchy that structured Cahokian society. To pass through the gates was to acknowledge authority. To be kept outside was to know one's place. Around the same time, shortly before the palisade was built, something violent occurred in the East St. Louis precinct, across the river from Cahokia's main core. A large residential compound burned. The fire was not accidental. The buildings were deliberately destroyed. Among the ashes, archaeologists would find ritual deposit stone tools, exotic materials, pots filled with shelled maize suggesting the burning had ceremonial significance. Some scholars interpret this event as evidence of unrest, of resistance to growing inequalities, of factional conflict within the elite or between elite and commoners. The compound was later rebuilt, but not for residential purposes. Whatever had happened there, whatever it represented, altered its use. The area became something else, perhaps a warning, perhaps sacred ground where violence had sanctified or polluted the earth. By the late 12th century, people began leaving Cahokia in significant numbers. The outward migration was gradual at first, barely noticeable against the city's overall population. But it accelerated. Families departed for smaller settlements where chiefs' demands were lighter, where labor obligations were less onerous, where land was more available. Some may have left for ideological reasons, rejecting the hierarchical system that concentrated wealth and power atop the mounds. Others left for practical reasons, diminishing returns from agriculture, increasing social conflict, the simple desire for space and autonomy. By the middle of the 13th century, Cahokia's population had declined by half or more. The mounds, once the focus of continuous construction and maintenance, received less attention. No new major earthworks were initiated. The palisade rotted in sections and was not fully replaced. The great plaza still hosted ceremonies and games, but the crowds were smaller, less vibrant. And then, sometime around 1350, the city was abandoned entirely. the remaining population dispersed. The wooden structures, houses, temples, palisades decayed and collapsed. The mounds remained, but they stood empty, silent monuments to a vanished civilization. When French explorers arrived in the region in the late 17th century, Cahokia was a ghost city, its grassy mounds mysterious and unexplained, its name and purpose forgotten. Why? What caused this decline and eventual abandonment? Scholars have proposed numerous explanations, none entirely satisfying, each capturing part of a complex reality. Environmental degradation is often cited. A city of tens of thousands requires enormous quantities of wood for construction, for cooking fires, for the palisade walls that enclosed the core. The surrounding forests were extensively harvested. Some researchers hypothesized that deforestation led to erosion, which in turn caused flooding of the local creeks and made the floodplain less habitable. But more recent archaeological investigations have found limited evidence for such flooding during Cahokia's occupation. The ground surface remained stable. The catastrophic environmental collapse once imagined did not occur, or at least not in the simple form initially proposed. Climate change offers another explanation. The favorable conditions that characterized Cahokia's rise, relative aridity, and infrequent flooding shifted around 1200. The region entered a period of more variable climate, with increased flooding. A major flood event around 1200 may have disrupted agriculture, damaged infrastructure, and undermined confidence in the elite's ability to control cosmic forces. When floods came, when crops failed, when the chief's prayers and ceremonies did not restore order, the ideological foundation of their authority cracked. Subsequent droughts compounded the problems. The period from 1150 to 1200 saw a series of droughts strike the Cahokia area. Agricultural yields declined by more than 50% in some estimates. Food scarcity strained the city's social fabric. The tribute system that funneled resources to the elite became unsustainable. Subordinate settlements, already resentful of extraction, rebelled or simply ceased cooperation. The trade networks that supplied exotic goods contracted. The elaborate ceremonies that legitimized hierarchy became hollow spectacles. Social tensions, evident in the burned compound and the construction of defensive palisades, likely intensified. The mass graves at Mound 72 tell stories of violence that scholars are still piecing together. Most of these burials occurred during Cahokia's peak, around 1100, when elaborate sacrificial rituals accompanied elite burials. Young women were killed, perhaps, by strangulation or bloodletting, and buried in groups, their deaths marking the passage of powerful chiefs into the afterlife. These women were not necessarily foreign tributes, as once thought, but locals, perhaps from Cahokia itself, sacrificed as part of religious practice. But one mass grave from around 1150 tells a different story. It contains the bodies of 39 men, women, and some children. They did not die peacefully. Skulls were bashed in. Bodies were decapitated. Projectile points were embedded in bones. They were killed violently and buried together without ceremony. This was not ritual sacrifice. This was massacre. Whether it represented internal conflict, a purge of rivals, suppression of a rebellion, or violence from external enemies remains unclear. But it speaks to a society under stress, where violence had become a tool of political control or a symptom of disintegration. By the late 13th century, the chieftain system that governed Cahokia appears to have fractured. The hierarchical structure depended on the ability of paramount chiefs to command labor, extract tribute, organize ceremonies, and maintain trade relationships. When agricultural surpluses declined, when floods and droughts disrupted predictability, when subordinate chiefs asserted independence, the system unraveled. People voted with their feet, leaving for smaller settlements where life was harder in some ways, but freer in others. The abandonment was complete. Cahokia did not decline into a smaller town or a remnant population. It emptied. By 1400, after the favorable climate conditions had passed, the site was deserted. The mounds endured, but the people were gone, scattered across the landscape, joining other communities, carrying memories that would fade with each generation. Centuries later, when European colonists arrived, they saw the mounds and marveled. Lacking knowledge of the Native American civilizations that had built them, many colonists refused to believe indigenous peoples capable of such accomplishments. They invented alternative explanations: lost tribes of Israel, wandering Phoenicians, ancient Europeans. It was easier to imagine vanished white civilizations than to acknowledge the sophistication of the cultures they were displacing and destroying. The truth, recovered slowly through archaeology, is both simpler and more profound. Cahokia was built by the ancestors of Native American peoples, by communities who developed agriculture, organized complex societies, created art and architecture of enduring power, and then, for reasons still debated, chose to abandon their greatest city and return to dispersed modes of living. The mounds remained as monuments to that choice or that necessity. They stood silent through centuries, weathering storms, growing grass and trees, sheltering animals. Farmers would plow around them. Towns would grow near them. Some mounds would be destroyed for development, countless smaller earthworks erased before anyone understood their significance. But the largest survived, and in their survival, they preserved evidence of a civilization that flourished and faded on the Mississippi floodplain. What remains now is earth and artifact, silence and speculation. The daily rhythms of life in Cahokia, the morning walks to the fields, the basket loads of earth carried up mound slopes, the chunky games in the plaza, the ceremonies at solstice, all of that lived experience dissolved into time. But the questions linger. Why did they build so grandly? Why did they leave so completely? What did they believe? What did they fear? These questions have no final answers, only better or worse approximations based on what the earth yields when excavated with care. The story of Cahokia's rise and fall is a story told in layers of soil, in patterns of post holes, in the chemistry of bones, in the distribution of artifacts. It is a story assembled fragment by fragment, a civilization reconstructed from its remnants. And perhaps that incompleteness is fitting. Cahokia in its height was a place of mystery ruled by elites who claimed esoteric knowledge, organized by cosmological principles that common people may have only partially understood, connected to trade networks and belief systems that extended far beyond the city's palisade walls. Its abandonment added another layer of mystery. The city that once rivaled London in size became a landscape of grass-covered hills, its name and purpose forgotten, its builders dispersed and silent. For those who lived through the decline, who witnessed the gradual emptying of the city, the experience must have been disorienting. To grow up in a vibrant metropolis and grow old in a ghost town. To remember the plaza filled with thousands and see it reclaimed by weeds. To watch the last families depart, leaving behind the monuments their grandparents had labored to build. What did they feel? Regret? Relief? Resignation? We cannot know, but we can imagine, standing where they stood, looking at the mounds rising against the sky, the river flowing past, as it always had, indifferent to human ambitions. The rhythm of the seasons continued. The land remained fertile. Life went on, but in different forms, different places, different ways. Cahokia's decline was not the end of Mississippian culture. Other centers persisted for centuries. But the greatest city was abandoned, and with it, perhaps, a particular vision of how human communities could be organized, a vision of hierarchy and monumentality, of concentrated power and dispersed labor, of cities rising from floodplains to touch the sky. The people who left carried their knowledge with them, their stories, their skills. They did not vanish. They became part of other communities, contributed to other cultures, lived and died, and left descendants. But Cahokia itself was finished. The mounds would stand as testimony, but the city was gone. And so it remains a presence and an absence, earth and emptiness, the largest city north of Mexico, reduced to silence and speculation, waiting through centuries for someone to ask the right questions, to dig carefully, to piece together from fragments the story of its extraordinary rise and its mysterious fall. Imagine yourself standing just outside the dense cluster of houses and mounds where the city begins to thin and the open land stretches toward the horizon. The dawn air is cool against your skin. The sky is a soft, even gray, with the faintest hint of color gathering along the eastern edge. You are not in the fields today. You have come to a different kind of space, a place not for planting, but for watching. Before you rises a circle of towering wooden posts, each sunk deep into the ground, each carefully placed. From a distance, it looks almost simple, a ring of timbers on the open plain. But as you walk closer, the sense of intention becomes unmistakable. The posts are evenly spaced. Their heights are similar. There is no randomness here, no improvisation. This is not a fence, not a palisade, not a corral. This is something else entirely. Later generations will give it a name borrowed from far across the ocean. Woodhenge, in quiet echo of the better-known Stonehenge in Britain. For you, it has no name separate from its function. It is a place where the sky is red. Step into the circle now. The ground within is bare, trampled by many feet. In the center, a single post stands, offset slightly from the true geometric center of the ring. From here, all alignments radiate. If you stand with your back to this central post and look outward, each of the outer posts marks a different point along the horizon, a different place where the sun will rise or set at different points in the year. Today is an equinox, the day when night and day are of nearly equal length, when the sun rises due east and sets due west. The people of Cahokia do not speak of axial tilt or orbital mechanics, but they have watched the sky with unwavering attention for generations. They know that at this moment in the year, the sun will rise in a particular place. They have planted a post there, precisely there, to catch that moment. As the gray of dawn brightens, more people gather quietly around the circle's perimeter. They stand at a respectful distance, leaving the interior to the priests, the astronomers, the representatives of the elite. The murmur of voices is low, subdued. This is not a spectacle for entertainment. It is an act of calibration, of synchronizing human time with cosmic rhythm. You stand near the edge, feeling the presence of others, but focused on the horizon. The central officiant takes position by the main sighting line between the central post and the one that marks today's sunrise. He holds a staff, perhaps, or simply raises his hand at the appropriate moment. Everyone's gaze follows. Slowly, very slowly, a bright edge appears along the horizon, exactly where the post stands. From your vantage point at the circle's center, it looks as though the sun is emerging from the front face of Monk's Mound, half a mile away, a glowing disk rising precisely above the city's greatest monument. The effect is deliberate. The alignment is not accidental. The timber circle, the mound, and the path of the sun have been woven together into a single visual and symbolic composition. For a moment, there is stillness. The breath of the city seems to pause. On the summit of Monk's Mound, where the paramount chief and the temple stand, figures move against the brightening sky. From Woodhenge, it appears as if the mound itself is giving birth to the sun, presenting it to the world. The chief, associated with that summit, with that temple, with that alignment, shares in this moment of cosmic authority. This is power, but it is a very particular kind of power. It is the power of prediction, of being able to say, on this day, at this time, the sun will rise there, and be right. It is the power of organizing ceremonies, plantings, harvests, and social obligations according to a reliable schedule derived from the sky. It is the power of possessing knowledge others do not fully understand, of embodying the connection between earth and heaven. The people around you may not grasp the geometric subtleties, the careful way in which the circle was plotted, how the 48 posts of one Woodhenge are set at. equal angular intervals around a radius of about 200 feet. How the central post is shifted a few feet to the east to correct for Cahokia's latitude and allow precise alignment with solstice and equinox points. But they do not need to. It is enough for them to see that the sun obeys the posts, that the posts obey the priests, that the priests obey the chief, and that the chief, in turn, claims to obey the unseen forces that govern the cosmos. From above, if you could somehow rise into the air and look down, the city would appear as an ordered pattern of earth and wood keyed to the movements of the heavens. Monk's Mound stands slightly off the true cardinal directions, but aligned to key solar events. The plaza spreads out before it, an open stage for rituals whose timing depends on observations made at the timber circles. The mounds that encircle the plaza are not randomly placed. Their positions echo cosmological concepts, the divisions between directions, the three-tiered universe of upper world, middle world, and underworld that Mississippian peoples imagine. The timber circles themselves exist in multiple versions. Over time, Cahokians built and rebuilt at least 5 such wood henges, each with a different diameter, each reusing some positions, shifting others. As buildings rose and fell, as ceremonial needs changed, as slightly more precise alignments were desired, the posts were replanned, the circle redrawn. The act of constructing these rings of cedar was itself a ritual performance. Trees selected and cut from distant stands, transported to the site, raised upright, aligned against reference points in the sky. The choice of cedar is not random. Cedar is a sacred material in many Native American traditions, associated with purification, with the vertical axis of the world, with the connection between realms. In Mississippian cosmology, the universe often appears as a layered structure. An upper world inhabited by sun, moon, stars, and powerful bird-like beings. A middle world where humans live on the Earth's surface, and an underworld of water, chaos, and serpentine spirits. The axis that links these realms, a tree, a pole, a pillar, appears again and again in art and myth. The wood henge posts, rising from soil to sky, echo this concept physically. If you close your eyes now and imagine the circle not as individual posts, but as a single symbolic form, you might see what Mississippian artists later carved and painted, a circle with a cross inside, marking the 4 cardinal directions and the ordered cosmos they represent. Some ceremonial beakers bear this design, with special marks at the positions corresponding to winter solstice sunrise and sunset, and radiating lines representing the rays of the sun. The same pattern appears in rock art, on engraved shells, on copper plates. It is a visual shorthand for the universe itself, mapped and domesticated. Here, in this circle on the plain outside Cahokia's walls, the universe is not an abstract concept. It is a practical guide to life. The timing of planting and harvest depends on knowing when the sun swings farthest north and south along the horizon, when it stands directly over the equator at equinox, when the length of days begins to change. The ceremonies that reaffirm the chief's position, that redistribute stored food in times of scarcity, that mark transitions of age and status, all cluster around these solar stations. The priests and astronomers of Cahokia roles likely intertwine know the sky in intimate detail. They have watched the sun's rising point shift slowly, day by day, from winter solstice back toward equinox, then on to summer solstice, then returning again. They mark these changes against the posts. They correct for irregularities. They adjust for the hazy horizon on humid mornings. Over years and decades, they refine a calendar that ties human obligations to celestial cycles. In this, Cahokia shares a sensibility with other great cities of the pre-Columbian Americas. Far to the south, in central Mexico, Teotihuacan's broad avenue and Great Pyramid complex align with significant celestial points, embedding cosmology into urban planning. Elsewhere, Maya cities mark solstices and equinoxes with temple alignments and architectural sight lines. Across the ocean, Stonehenge and other British monuments mark similar events. The details differ, but the impulse is recognizably human, to take the incomprehensible vastness of the sky and render it legible, to fold the movements of sun and stars into the fabric of daily and ceremonial life. Cahokia's woodhenge stands as a particularly elegant expression of this impulse. It is both simple and sophisticated, a ring of posts in a field, and a precise observatory capable of tracking the sun's path through the year. It requires no lenses, no metal instruments, only careful observation, patience, and an understanding passed from one generation of skywatchers to the next. As the sun climbs higher above Monk's Mound on this equinox morning, the formal portion of the observation concludes. The officiants may confer quietly, noting how well today's sunrise matches the expected alignment. Slight discrepancies might call for small adjustments in the timing of upcoming ceremonies, or perhaps the replacement of a post that has shifted. The crowd disperses. Some people return immediately to their homes, their fields, their tasks. Others linger at the edge of the circle, reluctant to leave the quiet order of this space where earth and sky meet. You remain for a moment longer, turning slowly to face different posts. Each one calls to mind a different time of year. Here, the winter solstice sunrise, low and far to one side, its light thin but returning, promising that the worst of the cold is nearly past. There, the summer solstice sunrise, high and strong, the signal that the growing season has reached its peak, that the fields must be tended carefully as corn ripens. Between them, the equinox points, balancing the year, dividing it into quarters that shape festivals, obligations, and rest. The elite of Cahokia derive immense authority from this knowledge. They are not merely wealthy or powerful in a material sense. They position themselves as mediators between cosmic order and human community. Their houses atop Monk's Mound and other platform mounds stand in deliberate relationships to the timber circles and to the sun's path. From the plaza, from Woodhenge, from distant fields, people see the sun rise or set in alignment with the places where chiefs and priests dwell. The message is quiet but persistent. These people belong at the center because they are aligned with the center of things. At the same time, this arrangement is fragile. A series of unexpected floods, an unseasonal drought, a sequence of celestial events not easily explained. These could all undermine the perceived reliability of elite cosmology. If the posts no longer correspond to the sun's path, if ceremonies fail to bring rain, if predictions falter, the aura of control evaporates. Power that depended on appearing in tune with the cosmos begins to erode. For now, in the centuries between 1050 and 1200, the system mostly works. The observations are accurate enough. The calendar, though perhaps adjusted occasionally, remains stable. The agricultural cycle follows the expected pattern more often than not. The people continue to gather at the timber circles on key days, to watch the sun emerge from behind mounds, to feel that they live in a world where the movements of heaven and the structures of their city are part of one continuous design. As the day advances, Woodhenge empties. The circle of posts stands alone again, silent and still, casting long, regular shadows across the ground. Birds perch briefly on the tops of some timbers, then fly away. The grass between posts stirs in the light breeze. The structure waits, as observatories always do, for the next significant alignment, the next moment when the sky and the circle and the city will come together in a single, shared act of attention. This waiting will outlast Cahokia itself. Long after the city is abandoned, long after the posts have rotted and fallen, the pattern of holes they left in the ground will remain. Centuries later, archaeologists will uncover those circular arcs of post holes and realize that they are not random. They will map them, reconstruct them, stand at the recreated center, and watch the sun rise over Monk's Mound on an equinox morning, just as people did 800, 900 years before. In that moment of reenactment, the distance between past and present narrows. The same sun rises over the same horizon, aligning with the same mound. The posts are new, but the geometry is old. The questions are old as well. How did the people of Cahokia develop such precise astronomical knowledge without written records, without metal instruments? How did they embed that knowledge in their city, in their politics, in their religion? How did it feel to stand in the circle and watch the sun obey the posts? The answers lie partly in careful excavation, in radiocarbon dates, in soil chemistry, and post-hole patterns. But they also lie in imagination, in the ability to place oneself quietly among those long-vanished observers, to feel the cool pre-dawn air, to see the first sliver of light appear exactly where it is meant to appear, to sense in that alignment a reassurance that the universe is, for the moment, in order. As you leave Woodhenge now in your mind, walking back toward the mounds and the dense heart of the city, you carry with you an awareness that Cahokia is more than an accumulation of houses and fields. It is a constructed cosmos, an attempt to mirror on Earth the patterns seen in the sky. The timber circles, the orientations of mounds, the cross and circle motifs carved and painted on ceremonial objects, all these are threads in a single tapestry of meaning. That tapestry will fray in time. The timber posts will rot. The ceremonies will cease. The knowledge of precise alignments will be lost to living memory. But for a span of generations, in a city on the Mississippi floodplain, people rose before dawn, gathered in silence, and watched the sun rise through rings of cedar, believing that in doing so, they were witnessing not only a daily event, but a reaffirmation of the deep structure of their world. Imagine yourself once more in Cahokia's central plaza, but this time, instead of watching a chunky game or passing traders' stalls, allow your gaze to travel slowly upward to the terraces of Monk's Mound and to the buildings that crown its summit. From here, you can begin to sense not only the physical city, but the invisible architecture of power that binds it together. At the very top of this largest of the mounds stands a broad, imposing structure, the residence and temple of the paramount chief, the person at the apex of Cahokia's hierarchy. This is not merely a large house. It is a symbol, a statement in earth and wood that this individual is different from ordinary people, elevated both literally and figuratively above the rest. The wide terraces below form levels through which authority flows downward, from the chief and his close kin to lesser elites, and then on to the thousands of commoners who live in the houses you walked among in the first segment. Cahokia is what archaeologists call a complex chiefdom, a society, organized under one or more paramount chiefs who control surrounding towns and villages, forming a multi-tiered hierarchy. At the top is the central place, the urban core you have been exploring, with its mounds, plazas, palisades, and dense population. Below it are mid-level centers, smaller towns with their own mounds, their own local elites. Below those are village communities and scattered farmsteads. In total, this network stretches for many miles along the Mississippi and its tributaries, linking dozens, perhaps hundreds, of settlements into a single political fabric. In this system, the paramount chief is more than an administrator. People treat him, and often his close relatives, as semi-divine beings, individuals whose authority flows from the cosmos as much as from human arrangements. Tribute is the lifeblood of this power. Each year, people in outlying settlements send a portion of their crops, their hunting yields, and their crafted goods toward the center. Corn, beans, and squash arrive in baskets. Dried meat and fish in bundles. Finely made pottery, shell beads, copper ornaments, and other prestige items in carefully wrapped packages. This tribute accumulates in storehouses near the mounds, forming reserves that belong to the chief and his household. From that reserve, the chief redistributes food and goods at key moments, during ceremonies, after disasters, in times of scarcity. In this way, generosity and control intertwine. People depend on these distributions, especially during lean months, and that dependence reinforces the chief's authority. To receive food from the chief's stores is to accept the legitimacy of the system that gathered it. The structure of this chiefdom is visible not only in what people give, but in where they live. The closer one's dwelling is to the core, and especially to the mounds, the higher one's likely status. Elite families reside atop or immediately beside platform mounds in spacious houses, with access to fine goods and reliable food. Mid-ranking figures, specialist artisans, ritual experts, local leaders cluster in neighborhoods within the palisade. Commoners, who do most of the farming and construction, tend to live farther out, their houses smaller and more modest. The landscape itself becomes a map of social rank. Burials tell a similar story. In some mounds, archaeologists have uncovered graves of individuals accompanied by elaborate offerings, headdresses of shell beads, finely worked copper plates, stacks of stone points, and sometimes the bodies of others who appear to have been sacrificed to accompany them in death. The celebrated Birdman burial at Cahokia is one such case. A man laid out on a bed of shell in the shape of a bird, surrounded by thousands of beads and arrow points. His grave a powerful statement of status and symbolism. The Birdman, or Falcon Warrior, is a central figure in Mississippian religious iconography. On engraved shells, copper plates, and stone carvings, a human figure with bird-like attributes appears again and again, sometimes with wings or a beaked mask, sometimes with talon-like feet or feathered capes. The falcon is associated with the upper world, with the sun and stars, with warfare and the swift strike of arrows. It is an avatar of warriors and a symbol of dynastic ambition, its flight a metaphor for the succession of rulers across generations. At Cahokia, this Birdman imagery is especially prominent. It links the ruling elite to the celestial realm, portraying them as embodiments or close associates of powerful sky beings. The same bird of prey symbolism appears in high-stakes gaming, particularly in Chunky, where the speed and precision of the game echo the swift movements of raptors, and where large wagers and public performance make the plaza a theater for status and rivalry. A successful Chunky player can gain prestige, but the overarching system ensures that true, enduring power remains concentrated in the hands of those who control mounds, temples, and tribute. The chief's authority is therefore both political and religious, a theocratic power in which governing and mediating with the sacred are inseparable. The platform mounds serve as bases for temples as well as residences. Rituals conducted there reinforce the idea that the chief stands at the intersection of earth and sky, middle world and upper world. When the chief presides over ceremonies timed by Woodhenge and other astronomical markers, the connection becomes visible. The sun rises along an axis that passes through the chief's domain. The cosmos seems to acknowledge his role. Below the paramount chief are subordinate chiefs who oversee outlying communities. Each of these local leaders collects tribute from their own people, resolves disputes, organizes labor for local projects, and then passes a portion of what they collect up the hierarchy. The result is a funneling of resources toward Cahokia, which becomes not only a spiritual center, but an economic hub. In return, goods from distant places flow inward along the same networks. Copper from the Lake Superior region, marine shells from the Gulf of Mexico, mica from the Appalachians, and perhaps even materials from as far as the Great Plains and beyond all converge here. These exotic items are transformed by Cahokia's artisans into objects of prestige. Shells are cut and ground into beads and gorgets, engraved with complex motifs. Copper is hammered into plates bearing the Birdman and other supernatural figures, and polished until it gleams in firelight. Such items are too valuable, too symbolically charged, to be used casually. They adorn elites in life and accompany them in death, reinforcing the idea that access to sacred and distant things is a privilege of rank. This system of chiefdom and tribute approaches, but does not fully reach, the level of a state as seen in Mesoamerican civilizations. There is no evidence of writing, no bureaucratic record-keeping in the form of texts, no stone architecture rivaling the great temples of the Maya or Mexico. Yet in terms of social complexity, multi-tiered settlement hierarchies, centralized authority, large-scale monument building Cahokia, and its Mississippian peers stand surprisingly close. The gap between them and their southern contemporaries is narrower than popular imagination has often allowed. At the household level, this political structure appears as a steady set of expectations rather than abstract theory. For a commoner, it means participating in communal labor projects, building mounds, maintaining palisades, digging ditches, whenever the chief's agents call. It means sending a share of crops away each year, knowing that some portion may return as redistributed food during festivals or hard times, while another portion remains in elite hands. It means attending ceremonies, watching rituals in which the chief and his kin play central roles, listening to stories that frame such authority as natural, necessary, even sacred. For elites, the system carries different burdens. High-ranking individuals compete among themselves for influence, seeking to place their children in advantageous marriages, to associate their lineages with powerful symbols like the Birdman, to sponsor ceremonies that increase their prestige. Factional rivalries simmer beneath the surface, sometimes erupting into open conflict. Evidence from burned compounds and violent burials suggests that struggles for power could be brutal, with losers eliminated and their households destroyed. The order that appears so stable when seen from a distance is up close, maintained through constant negotiation and, at times, force. Despite these tensions, for as long as Cahokia thrives, the chiefdom system provides a coherent framework for life. It gives people explanations for why some live atop mounds and others at their base, why certain individuals receive exotic goods and grand burials while others do not, why labor obligations and tribute demands exist, and why rituals must be performed at particular times and places. The story told is that of a cosmos in which each thing has its appointed role, from sun and stars to chiefs and commoners. When the city begins to falter, this framework becomes vulnerable. Droughts or floods disrupt harvests. Tribute flows weaken as outlying communities feel the strain and begin to question the value of sending their surplus to a center that no longer seems able to guarantee stability. Trade networks contract, reducing the supply of prestige goods that once helped cement alliances and differentiate elites. In such conditions, the same mechanisms that once held the chiefdom together can hasten its collapse. Without adequate tribute, the paramount chief cannot maintain generosity. Without generosity, loyalty erodes. Without loyalty, authority becomes brittle. Yet even as the political structure frays, the mounds remain, the plazas remain, the material traces of hierarchy remain. Long after the last paramount chief of Cahokia has died and been laid to rest, perhaps with human sacrifices at his side, perhaps with copper plates and shell beads arranged carefully around his body, the earthworks continue to mark out the shape of the system he once commanded. The largest of them, Monk's Mound, still towers above the floodplain centuries later. Its terraces softened by erosion, but unmistakable. Its summit, a quiet reminder of the house and temple that once stood there. In the present, when you look at Cahokia's remains, you see the shadows of this chiefdom system traced in soil and artifact. You see the concentration of exotic materials in certain areas and their relative absence in others, mapping the flow of tribute and the distribution of privilege. You see the differences between burials, some lavish, some spare, reflecting unequal access to power and sacred symbolism. You see the arrangement of mounds and plazas, the careful orientation of structures, the monumental labor invested in elevating a few above the many. And you see, too, how easily such a system can vanish. Complex chiefdoms, anthropologists note, are fragile. They depend on a fine balance of environmental stability, economic surplus, and ideological cohesion. When that balance tips, when climate shifts, when disease spreads, when war intensifies, when belief falters, the entire structure can implode in a matter of generations. Cahokia's story fits this pattern. Its rise was rapid, its fluorescence brief, its fall decisive. Tonight, as you let your attention drift over this ancient political landscape, There is a certain quiet comfort in recognizing both its sophistication and its impermanence. The chiefs who once seemed to embody divine power are gone. The tribute stores they controlled are long since emptied. The birdman's copper plates lie in museum cases or still in the ground, their meanings partially obscured by time. Yet the people whose labor supported this system, the farmers, builders, craft workers, are also gone, their individual names and stories lost, their lives folded into the earth just as thoroughly as those of the elites they served. What endures are patterns of mounds and plazas, of trade and tribute, of symbols and ceremonies. These patterns tell a story of political ingenuity, religious imagination, and social inequality woven together into a single tapestry. They show that long before European contact, the lands along the Mississippi hosted complex, hierarchical societies capable of organizing thousands of people, building monumental earthworks, and sustaining far-reaching networks of exchange. As you rest now, consider how far these realities lie from older stereotypes that imagined pre-Columbian North America as a sparsely populated wilderness. Cahokia and its fellow Mississippian centers reveal a different picture, one of cities and chiefdoms, of elites and commoners, of intricate politics and far-reaching cosmology. The world you have been visiting in your mind may be distant in time, but it is close in its human complexity, its struggles for power, its systems of belief, its efforts to make sense of the sky and the soil and the fragile arrangements that bind people together. Let that awareness settle gently, not as something urgent or alarming, but as a soft background understanding that beneath modern fields and towns, quietly enduring in the shapes of old earthworks, lie the memories of a civilization that once rose, flourished, and faded on this very ground. The mounds remain. The river flows. The fields that once fed tens of thousands now lie quiet beneath modern soil. As you rest here at the end of this journey, let the story of Cahokia gently settle in your mind, not as a sharp, vivid narrative, but as a soft landscape of impressions and rhythms. You have walked, in imagination, through the small thatched house of a commoner, feeling the packed earth beneath bare feet, smelling the faint smoke of the central hearth, hearing the distant murmur of a city waking at dawn. You have followed well-worn paths from home to field, from field to plaza, from plaza to mound, tracing the daily pattern of labor that made everything else possible. You have seen corn, beans, and squash rising in careful rows, tasted the simple meals that sustained bodies through long days of work, and sensed how the rhythm of their lives followed the slow turn of seasons rather than the quick flicker of clocks. You have also watched the city itself rise and fade. In your mind's eye, you have seen a quiet floodplain transform into a metropolis larger than London of its time, its flat horizon broken by more than 100 mounds and a great central plaza. You have imagined the intensity of that construction, millions of basket loads of earth carried up slopes year after year, until Monk's Mound towered 100 feet above the plain, covering 14 acres at its base. You have felt, if only faintly, the weight of that labor on shoulders and backs, and the sense of being part of something larger than any individual. Then gently, you watched the same city empty. You saw the palisade, once a strong line of upright posts, begin to sag and rot. You saw families slip away towards smaller settlements, the crowds in the plaza thinning, the ceremonies less grand, the trade goods less plentiful. You sensed how floods, droughts, social tension, and crisis of belief could all combine to loosen the bonds that held this society together. In time, you watched the last fires go out, the last doorways close, and the mounds stand silent as grass and trees slowly reclaimed their surfaces. You have stood inside the circle of Woodhenge at dawn, surrounded by tall cedar posts, waiting for the first bright edge of the sun to appear at the horizon. You have watched it rise exactly where it ought to rise, slipping into view over the distant bulk of Monk's Mound, aligning earth and sky in a single quiet moment. You have felt the stillness of the crowd, the calm assurance of the astronomer priests, the steady authority of a calendar that links human tasks to celestial cycles. And you have understood, in a gentle way, how such knowledge could support a chief's claim to stand at the center of the cosmos. You have also traced the invisible lines of power that bound this society together. You have seen how tribute flowed from outlying villages to the central storehouses, how corn and crafted goods accumulated at the feet of the mounds, how chiefs and their kin lived in elevated houses overlooking the labor of others. You have imagined the copper plates and shell beads, the Bergman symbols and falcon warriors that wrapped religious meaning around political authority. You have grasped, softly, that Cahokia's chiefdom approached the complexity of a state, even without writing or stone, and that this complexity rested on many small, repetitive acts by common hands. Now, as the narrative draws to a close, let all these images grow dimmer and more distant, as if you are slowly walking backward away from the sight. The mounds recede. The timber circles vanish. The fields, the houses, the plaza all fade, leaving only the broad, quiet river and the open sky. Think for a moment of the contrast between that world and the one you inhabit now. You lie most likely in a room sheltered by walls that will not be washed away by a sudden flood. You sleep on a bed raised from the floor, under a roof that does not depend on constant patching and rethatching. Your food does not come solely from the yield of a single season's harvest in a single field. Your comfort tonight is not the fragile result of 1 year's weather, 1 year's labor. The people of Cahokia lived with a constant awareness of risk of crop failure, of political upheaval, of disease, of conflict. They did not speak of climate or economics as abstractions, but they felt their effects intimately in their muscles, in their bellies, in the shape of each day. Yet within that constant uncertainty, they created order. In the neat rows of the three sisters, in the geometries of mounds and plazas, in the regular spacing of wood-henge posts, in the patterns engraved on shell and copper. As you breathe now, notice that same search for order within yourself, not as something anxious, but as something soothing. The breath goes in, the breath goes out. The pattern repeats. In that simple rhythm, you are not so far from the farmers who rose at dawn to weed their plots, from the workers who climbed mounds with baskets of earth, from the observers who marked the sun's slow journey along the horizon, day after day, year after year. The story of Cahokia reminds you that even the most impressive human structures are temporary. Great mounds erode, palisades rot, chiefdoms rise and fall, trade networks expand and contract. Yet for the individual, what matters most in any era is the small circle of daily life, the warmth of a hearth, the sharing of food, the companionship of family, the familiar path walked so many times that the body can follow it almost without thought. Tonight, your own circle is smaller and quieter than a pre-Columbian city. You are not surrounded by 10 or 20,000 people. You are surrounded perhaps by a few, or by none at all, but you are enclosed by walls and routines that keep you safe. The dangers that preoccupied Cahokia's inhabitants are, for you in this moment, distant and abstract. Floods and droughts may still occur, but your immediate concern is simply rest. Let the weight of that history ease your sense of urgency. The people of Cahokia carried responsibilities you do not need to shoulder. Their chiefs worried about tribute and ceremony. Their farmers worried about yields and pests. Their artisans worried about satisfying patrons with fine copper and shell. You here now can set those worries aside. The city has already risen and fallen. Its story is complete. Your role is only to witness it briefly, then to let it drift away. Feel your body sinking a little deeper into whatever supports you. Notice the points where you make contact with bed or floor, the back of your head, the line of your shoulders, the curve of your spine, the weight of your legs. Each point of contact is a small anchor, holding you gently in place, just as the mounds once anchored Cahokia's skyline, just as the posts of Woodhenge anchored its calendar. In your mind, The Mississippi is flowing past the dark outline of the abandoned mounds now. The stars are wheeling overhead, indifferent to human plans. Grass rustles softly on the terraced slopes. Perhaps an animal pauses on a mound's side, listening, then moves on. No fires burn. No voices carry across the night. The city that once bustled with life is as quiet as the room around you. Allow that quiet to expand. Let it fill the spaces between your thoughts. If a fragment of the story returns a glimpse of a commoner's house, a sunrise over Monk's Mound, a circle of cedar posts, let it pass through without effort. As a dream passes, you do not need to hold the details. The mounds have held them for centuries. The earth remembers. Your only task now is to rest. The past is settled. The present, for this brief stretch of time, can be simple. Breath in, breath out. The rhythm of your life in this moment is enough. And as the memory of Cahokia recedes into darkness, as the last trace of the mounds blends with the horizon of your own thoughts, you may find that you are already drifting gently, steadily into sleep.